Park. Here's Dothan, Alabama, and Guntersville, Alabama. Head up to Alaska. At least 25 No Kings protests all across Alaska, including Nome and Homer and Juneau and Sitka, basically every town of any size that you can name in Alaska, and a bunch you've never heard of. Look at the big crowd in Anchorage. Right? We've got a big, look at the crowd in Anchorage. Here's also Seward and Fairbanks, and in Wasilla, from which Sarah Palin can see Russia from her house. Now to Arizona. More than 60 No Kings protests all across the state of Arizona. State's newsroom reports that when Arizona had its huge turnout for the No Kings protests in June, one of those states where people were really wowed by the turnout in June, that was about 40 Arizona protests in June. This time, they had 60, including Scottsdale and Goodyear, Arizona. Also Flagstaff, one of my favorite places in the whole country. People turned out all along Route 66 in Flagstaff. And look at the huge crowd. Look at Phoenix. Look at the huge crowd that turned out at the state capitol in Phoenix. On to Arkansas. No Kings organizers and Pride March organizers got lucky this weekend when both Arkansas's annual Pride Parade and the No Kings protests happened to fall on the same day, on Saturday. Everybody seemed pretty happy with the coincidence. Events kind of dovetailed in Little Rock. This woman from Conway, Arkansas, came out to Little Rock to show that she was proud of her 3 Antifa, that is anti-fascist uncles, who fought for this country and against fascism in World War II. But lots and lots of people turned out in Little Rock, Arkansas this weekend. Here's also a look at Jonesboro, Arkansas, and Vilonia, Arkansas. That's in Faulkner County, population less than 5,000. And here's Hot Springs, Arkansas, in the pouring rain. Tons of people turned out. Today, I was reminded for the first time since elementary school that there are no states that start with B. So we just jump right from Arkansas to California, where there were hundreds of No Kings events in California. I could spend the whole night just showing you protests in California alone, but here's just a sampling from Livermore and Oakland, both in Northern California, and then Long Beach and Los Angeles in Southern California. Los Angeles had big protests over the course of the day, spread out over the course of the day. But so many of the California protests were just huge. I mean, Sacramento was really, really big. Look at Sacramento, upper left there. San Diego, upper right. Look how big that is. Look at Santa Cruz. San Francisco was always going to be big, but Trump's threat to send troops to San Francisco may have goosed the turnout there. It covered more than a dozen city blocks in San Francisco. Colorado, here's Denver, where an overflow crowd spilled out of Civic Center Park. And here's Colorado Springs, and here's Centennial, Colorado. Here's Littleton, Colorado. Connecticut, at least 50 different No Kings protests in Little Connecticut this weekend. 50 different events. Here's New Haven and Milford and Westport and Hartford. The state capitol was a huge turnout at the state capitol in Connecticut this weekend. On to Delaware. Here's Rehoboth Beach and Bethany Beach and Newark and Wilmington, North Carolina. They got a big crowd along the Bancroft Parkway in Wilmington. Florida never disappoints, depending on how you think about disappointment. Really big crowds in Miami in particular this weekend. Apparently some local Proud Boys came out to try to start stuff with the No Kings Proud in Miami, but people just shouted them down and nothing really happened. So here's a look at Miami. Again, big crowds in Miami, big crowds in Jacksonville. We saw good turnout in St. Augustine and in St. Petersburg and in Tampa. Just tons of people turned out in all sorts of different protests all across Florida. The Bulwark posted this video. This is of interest, particularly to political junkies. This is the Villages in Florida, which is the famous supposed Republican voting stronghold in Florida. Thousands of retirees turned out at the Villages this weekend to protest against Trump there. That's something. In Georgia, there was a huge No Kings protest in Atlanta. But that wasn't the only one. State's newsroom is reporting that there were 40 different No Kings protests in Georgia this weekend, including these in Savannah and in Macon and in Augusta, in addition to that huge one in Atlanta that just covered multiple city blocks and seemed to go on forever. Hawaii, point of interest here, Hawaii did not call itself No Kings this weekend. Hawaii did not call their protest No Kings protest, since the Hawaiian people quite rightfully, did have kings and also queens. So in Hawaii, in order to be sensitive on that issue, it was instead no dictators. And who can argue with that? They had a good turnout at their no dictators protests on Maui and in Hilo and in Kona in the pouring rain. And a ton of people turned out in Honolulu. Idaho. Everybody thinks of Idaho as so hard right. It's like the poster child for a hard right-wing state. But tell that to the massive numbers of people who keep turning up for anti-Trump events like this No Kings protest this weekend in Boise. The Idaho Statesman said they talked to a number of people who said this might be the largest protest anyone has ever seen in Boise for anything. So here's a look at Boise and also Pocatello and McCall, Idaho, and Nampa, Idaho. In Illinois, I think we knew that Chicago was going to be pretty big, given the way Trump is trying to wage war on the city of Chicago, and given the kind of spontaneous and just absolutely uncompromising resistance that we are seeing against Trump and particularly his federal immigration agents every single day. We knew it was going to be big in Chicago. Did we know the Chicago protest would stretch to fill 22 city blocks? I'm not sure we knew it was going to be that big. I'm not sure anybody could have expected that. But yeah, Chicago there in the upper right-hand side. Here's also Carbondale, Illinois. Here's Little Park Ridge, Illinois. Here's Urbana, Illinois. On to Indiana. Indianapolis was really, really big. Look at that upper left-hand corner. Indianapolis was bigger than anything I've seen there. As we've been covering protests this year, and Indianapolis has been turning out pretty big numbers. Here's also Columbus, Indiana, and South Bend, and Fort Wayne, Indiana. In Iowa, Des Moines was huge. And I think maybe we now know to expect that in Des Moines, the turnout for something like this will be huge. But also, look at Davenport was really big. Look at Cedar Rapids was really big. Here's Des Moines again, along with Dubuque, Iowa, and Decorah, Iowa, and Iowa City. Just big turnout all over Iowa this weekend. Kansas, here's Topeka, Kansas. And that's in the upper right. You got Overland Park in the upper left. Wichita, Kansas in the lower left. Hello, Frog Hat. Lawrence, Kansas in the lower right. Kentucky. In Kentucky, the headline at the Lexington Herald Leader is "Thousands March at No Kings Rally in downtown Lexington." Quote, "We are anti-fascists." In Lexington, it was a mile-long march route up Main Street and down Vine Street, and the whole No Kings crowd filled that whole mile-plus route, plus Courthouse Plaza in Lexington. Just huge turnout in Lexington. Here's a look at that crowd in Lexington and also the crowd in Paducah and Owensboro, Kentucky. And of course, Louisville, which saw a bunch of people turn out in Louisville, Kentucky this weekend. Louisiana had at least 11 different No Kings protests all over the state. Here's New Orleans and Baton Rouge and Lafayette and Shreveport. Up to Maine. No Kings Day this weekend happened to be the 250 years to the day, the 250-year anniversary of the British attacking Portland, Maine, because, no kings. This was the 250th anniversary of the British attack on Portland, Maine. Thousands of people turned out at more than 30 protests in Maine. In Portland, they say they had a really, really big turnout at the June No Kings event. But this time they say they think they may have doubled the numbers that they had turn out in June. Look at that. Here's Portland and Bangor and Augusta, the state capital. Also Southwest Harbor on Mount Desert Island in Maine. Maryland was a little bit off the hook. The biggest city in the state, Baltimore, of course, not only had a huge turnout for No Kings. Again, it's another one of those cities that Trump is threatening to send the military into it. That, I think, helps goose turnout in any city that he's threatening. But Baltimore, simultaneous to its very large No Kings event, also had a huge marathon this weekend. That said, credit to the city and its public safety and political leadership. Everything seems to have gone off without a hitch in Baltimore. Here's a look at Baltimore and also Townsend, Maryland, and Frederick, Maryland. Local press in Maryland reported on surprisingly large No Kings events, even in the really Republican parts of the state, like out on the Eastern Shore. Okay, Massachusetts. Yeah, Boston, come on. Look at that. Again, Not AI. That's a real thing. Look at that crowd in Boston. Boston Mayor Michelle Wu told the huge crowd at the Boston Common that in Boston, every day is No King's Day. Because duh. It was just huge in Boston, but there were more than 100 No Kings protests in little old Massachusetts, including one in Western Massachusetts in Northampton, which shut down the whole downtown. They had to close all of Main Street in downtown Northampton. Here's a look at Boston alongside Concord and Haverhill, Massachusetts, that long stretch of people there. Also Maynard, Massachusetts, but again, more than 100 No Kings events in Massachusetts. Michigan also had more than 100 No Kings protests this weekend all over the state, including up into the Upper Peninsula. Here's a look at Ann Arbor up in the upper left, where they had a huge turnout. Also a really big turnout in Detroit. There's a look at Ferndale, Michigan in the lower left there, and of course our beloved Flint, Michigan in the lower right. Minnesota, did you see the aerial shots of Minneapolis this weekend? I mean, I don't know, head-to-head Minneapolis to Boston. This is pretty intense, right? I don't know why I was surprised to see something that huge for No Kings in Minneapolis, but Minneapolis was just gigantic. Here's Minneapolis and also Duluth in the upper left, Anoka, Minnesota, and Northfield, Minnesota. Head from Minnesota down to Mississippi. No Kings protests, not just in college town Oxford, Mississippi, the home of Ole Miss, and in Jackson, where people rallied on the South Lawn of the Mississippi State Capitol, but you also saw good turnout and big protests in Hernando, Mississippi, and in spunky little beautiful Gulfport, Mississippi. They got a big crowd there. Missouri, Kansas City Star described the No Kings protests in Missouri as, quote, taking over Kansas City. The paper saying throngs of people filled and then spilled out of Mill Creek Park in Kansas City. So here's a look at Kansas City, Missouri. It really was big. And Columbia, Missouri, which was also really big. Springfield, Missouri. Look at that, both sides of the street. And then up in the upper right-hand corner there, that's Jefferson City, the state capital of Missouri. People there on the state capitol steps. Montana, 31 different No Kings events in Montana. Lots of people in Missoula turned out, but also surprising numbers in some surprising places. Here's West Yellowstone and Red Lodge, Montana. That's Bozeman up in the upper left. Our friends again at States Newsroom report that in Polebridge, Montana, which is right on the edge of Glacier National Park, they had more people turn out to protest than the actual population of the town. Welcome, visitors. Here's a hippo suit and a sign. Thank you for visiting. Nebraska, 15 different No Kings protests across the state. Hello, Omaha. Here's Lincoln, Nebraska in the upper right there. Look at that crowd. And Fremont, Nebraska, and Scottsbluff in the lower right there. Nevada, the Reno one was really, really big. Here's Carson City as well as Reno. Here's Henderson, Nevada, and of course, beautiful Las Vegas. There were dozens of No Kings protests in Live Free or Die, New Hampshire this weekend. NHPR, New Hampshire Public Radio, talked to people who said they had never seen a protest in Concord, New Hampshire that was as large as the one there this weekend at the State House and along Main Street in Concord. Here's a look at Littleton, New Hampshire and Portsmouth. Here's Plymouth, New Hampshire and New London. People turned out in Revolutionary War garb because, of course, it's New Hampshire. New Jersey had dozens of No Kings protests. Here's a look at some of the New Jersey No Kings protests. Montclair, New Jersey, up in the upper left. Newton, Morristown, the great city of Newark, New Jersey, Toms River. Red Bank, New Jersey. I draw your attention to Red Bank there in the center on the top row. I draw your attention there because that's the No Kings protest this weekend that John Bon Jovi went to. John Bon Jovi, who MSNBC producer Rainey Kale may or may not be actively in love with, do not tell her husband Jimmy. John Bon Jovi's restaurant in Red Bank is offering free meals to furloughed federal workers during the shutdown. Mr. Bon Jovi himself turned up there this weekend and then joined the No Kings protest in that great little town, Red Bank, New Jersey. Hello. New Mexico, thousands and thousands of people. Absolutely. Look at that. Filled the streets of Albuquerque. Local Channel 7 reported that it brought Albuquerque traffic to a halt for so long and across so many streets that Albuquerque drivers stopped waiting for it to pass and just parked their cars and got out of their cars to either watch and wait or to themselves just join it. So that is the huge crowds in Albuquerque on the left side of your screen there. Also really big numbers turning out in places like Santa Fe and Las Cruces. Now, alphabetically after New Mexico, that brings us to New York. Think anybody turned out for No Kings in New York? I don't know. There's a lot to do in New York this weekend. A lot of oh, yeah. Okay. How about an unbroken sea of people from 14th Street all the way to 47th Street and beyond? Look at that. I mean, New York is not just New York City. Upstate New York had more than 20 different No Kings protests. But in New York City, it was just absolutely massive. The ACLU says that 20,000 people trained in advance of this protest. 20,000 people did some kind of training with the ACLU, nonviolence training, de-escalation training, know your rights training. That should have given us some sort of sign that the turnout in New York City was going to be this massive. Just unbelievable in New York. Here's also a look at Buffalo, New York, and Syracuse and Rochester as well. North Carolina, big protests in Raleigh, North Carolina this weekend. Here's also a look at Charlotte, North Carolina, and Waxhaw, and Morganton, and Durham, North Carolina, with that aerial shot there so you can see how it wraps around the downtown in Durham. Head up to North Dakota. Local press in Fargo reports that thousands of people turned out at No Kings events in Fargo and in Bismarck. That was no sure thing, not only because it's North Dakota, but also because it was really windy and cold in North Dakota this weekend, so nobody quite knew what to expect in terms of turnout. But there were not only these big crowds in Fargo and Bismarck, but there were No Kings protests in Grand Forks and Jamestown and Devil's Lake and Dickinson and Williston and Minot and a bunch of other places. Here's Fargo on your left and Bismarck on your right. We've also got shots from Valley City, North Dakota, upper right there, and Grand Forks in the lower right there, all those places in North Dakota. On to Ohio, our friend Professor Tim Snyder, the author of On Tyranny. He spoke at a No Kings event in Cincinnati, right there at the Riverfront Park. Thousands of people turned out at the Ohio State House in Columbus. Look at that. Really big turnout in Columbus, Ohio. But there were dozens of No Kings events in Ohio this weekend. Hello, Toledo. Hello, Dayton. Hello, Worcester, Ohio. And say it with me now. Hello, Cleveland. Oklahoma saw just huge crowds in Oklahoma City. Look at that. Look at that shot in Oklahoma City. But there were 19 different Oklahoma No Kings protests this weekend. Here's a look at Tulsa as well, the upper left. One of my favorite cities in the country, Durant, Oklahoma, Muskogee, Oklahoma. Lots of people turning out in Oklahoma in the rain. Up to Oregon. You think anybody turned out in Portland, Oregon? Thousands and thousands and thousands of people turned out in Portland, Oregon. Nobody was left at home in Portland this weekend. Everybody was out at a No Kings event. But Oregon did not only turn out in Portland, they turned out everywhere, from the state capitol in Salem to Eugene and Beaverton and Oregon City. There were more than 50 No Kings protests all across the great state of Oregon this weekend. Pennsylvania saw massive crowds in Philadelphia. Look at that aerial shot in Philly, upper left-hand side there. But here's also a look at Pittsburgh and Westchester and Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Rhode Island, little old Rhode Island, is famous for you. Here's Providence, where there were tens of thousands of people at the state capitol. Here's also Little Compton, Rhode Island, on the upper right there. East Greenwich and Westerly, Rhode Island, saw tons of people turn out. South Carolina, here's Columbia and Spartanburg and Greenville and Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. I have to tell you, Myrtle Beach got this big, very festive turnout. It's also one of the only places where anyone got arrested this weekend. There was a single arrest when a woman who was driving near the protest, for some reason, pulled out a gun and waved it at people who were at the protest. She was arrested, spent a little time in jail. She says the gun was not loaded, but she says she is full of regret about what she did, and she's very sorry that she did it. That was weird in Myrtle Beach. Up to South Dakota, thousands of people showed up in Sioux Falls far outdrawing the numbers that organizers expected, according to reporting from the South Dakota Searchlight. Thousands of people turned out in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Now, in Sioux Falls, there was a planned counter demonstration, but as thousands of people turned out for the main No Kings thing, apparently only 30 people showed up for the whole counter demonstration, which was quite a disappointment for the counter demonstration organizers, who I guess thought they'd get like equal numbers. Sorry. Here's a look at Sioux Falls and Vermilion, South Dakota, and Aberdeen and Sturgis. Tennessee saw nearly 36 No Kings protests this weekend, including really big ones in Memphis, as you might expect, as Trump tries to send the military into Memphis as well. Also, really big turnout in Nashville. Look at that on the upper right. Here's also a look at Knoxville, which was big in the lower left-hand corner there, and Chattanooga, Tennessee. On to Texas. Texas was hilarious. So there were thousands and thousands and thousands of people who turned out to attend No Kings events in Texas this weekend, including a really big No Kings event in Austin. But in Austin, Texas Republican Governor Greg Abbott was so afraid. He was so afraid of the Austin No Kings protest, so afraid of the, grandmas and the kids and the, blind people and the people in wheelchairs and the people with their dogs in strollers and the people in inflatable lobster suits. He was so afraid that he literally called out the Texas National Guard. He told them to, quote, surge forces. That was his term. Surge forces into Austin. Surge forces. Look, there's a guy with the pride flag. There's a lady who says, my name is Aunt Tifa. Send in the troops. Meanwhile, Austin police sent out a tweet showing their smiling officers having a great time on a great day and thanking everybody in Austin for being so nice and so peaceful with 0 arrests. Literally, they ended their tweet, great job, Austin. While Texas's Republican Governor Greg Abbott is hiding in a closet saying, surge forces. He literally called in air support. Okay. Texas also got big crowds at Fort Worth and in Frisco, Texas. Dallas, huge crowds in Dallas, huge crowds in Houston, one of the greatest cities in America. A good turnout in Laredo, right on the border. Over in Utah saw a really, really, really big crowd at the, look at that, upper left-hand corner. Look at the crowd in Utah at the State House there in Salt Lake City. Here's also a look at Ogden, Utah, in the upper right there, Heber City, Utah, Logan, Utah, in the lower right-hand corner there. We're almost there. Vermont, here's a look at Burlington, Vermont. Look at the turnout in Burlington. And Montpelier, the state capital. Pay teachers, not ICE. Virginia, where Virginia's Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin was also apparently terrified. Glenn Youngkin put the National Guard in a state of active duty status because he, too, was so afraid of the, high school kids and the grandmas with the peace signs. But here's Virginia Beach and Arlington and Richmond and Roanoke, Virginia, and Glenn Youngkin hiding under a desk somewhere. Washington State saw really big crowds all over, including at Everett, Washington, where thousands of people turned out. And Governor Bob Ferguson turned out to address the crowd in Everett. There was really big turnout in Washington State in both Seattle and in Vancouver. That's Seattle on the left side of your screen there, Vancouver, Washington on the right side of your screen. Did West Virginia turn out for No Kings this weekend? Yes, they did. Among other places, they turned out in Charleston and in Kaiser and Berkeley Springs and Morgantown, West Virginia. Love your country enough to fight for it. Wisconsin, dozens of protests across Wisconsin, thousands and thousands of people in Cathedral Square Park in Milwaukee. That's a time lapse there in Madison, Wisconsin on the lower left. Also Catersburg, Wisconsin here, and Appleton, Wisconsin. Wyoming, a frigid, windy day in Wyoming, but people turned out at the state capitol in Cheyenne. Here's a look as well at Laramie and Jackson and Rocky Springs, Wyoming. And you've been waiting for this one. You think anybody turned out in Washington, D.C.? What do you think? D.C. was huge. There was not a big No Kings event in D.C. in June, because that's when Trump was doing his big, weird military parade on his birthday, remember? But this time, No Kings more than made up for it. Huge crowds in D.C. He's not even 1 year into his first term in office, and this is what D.C. looks like lined up against him. He is not even 1 year into his not even fully into his first year in office here. And he just had one of the largest days of protest in American history against him in every freaking state in the country. And so, yeah, naturally, he celebrates the occasion by getting out a backhoe to start tearing down the White House. He really doesn't want to have to answer to the people. You wouldn't do that if you ever thought you had to. There's a big protest movement now in this country, a big, sustainable, growing, peaceful, fired up protest movement, standing against this very unpopular president, who is not doing anything to make himself more popular over time, while the popular resistance to him just grows and grows and grows. We will talk about what that means in very specific terms coming up. Stay with us. This weekend, with 7 million plus people turning out, these really are some of the largest protests ever in American history. Now, if you've watched this show in the past, you might have noticed that we've talked to the folks from Indivisible a number of times on this show. And not just this year, not just recently. We've talked to them a lot, many times, going back years. You might also have noticed that every time we talk to the folks from Indivisible, going back to the very beginning, they emphasize one specific thing. They emphasize thinking local. So for these No Kings protests, for example, they said, if you have to travel more than an hour in order to get to your nearest No Kings protest, then don't do that. Don't travel more than an hour. If you have to go more than an hour to find one, that means you should be organizing your own, wherever it is that you live. Now, that is not generic protest advice. That is very specific to this movement, and it has specific consequences. In practical terms, following that principle this weekend looked like this. Not one giant protest in one central place, even though there were some really big protests in some places. Instead, though, it was a gazillion different protests. Yes, in some big cities, but also in small towns, in every nook and cranny all across this country. Anywhere there were people, there were anti-Trump protests. And if that dynamic feels a little different to you, it's because it might be a little different from what we're used to in this country. We talked last week on this show about new research from the Kennedy School at Harvard, titled, quote, "The Resistance Reaches into Trump Country." Quote, "The share of counties hosting at least one anti-Trump protest has risen markedly during Trump's second term, surpassing the historic spikes observed during his first term." What that means is, compared to his first term as president, there are more protests now in what we traditionally think of as red, Republican, pro-Trump areas of the country. In the months that they studied this year, Kennedy Center researchers found that, quote, "The median protest county in the U.S. actually cast more votes for Trump than for Kamala Harris." One of the academics who did that research on protests spreading into Trump country, what that person is most famous for is something that's called the 3.5% rule. This academic has studied hundreds of protest movements around the world over the last century to see if you can identify what makes for a successful popular campaign against an authoritarian government. It turns out, if you actually study this scientifically, successful anti-authoritarian movements tend to share a number of things in common. Number one, nonviolence. Scientifically speaking, nonviolent protest movements are twice as likely to prevail as violent ones. Successful movements are not only nonviolent, they also reach into uncharted territories. They appeal constantly to new constituencies, which is what makes the spread of the No Kings movement particularly interesting right now. Successful movements establish and maintain momentum. They're ultimately able to get people in positions of influence to change their behavior and priorities, as you see Democrats starting to get a little steel in their spine with all of these protests encouraging them to do so. Again, this research has determined that all of these things are necessary for an anti-authoritarian movement to succeed, but they're still not enough. You must be nonviolent. You must expand the map. You must appeal to new people all the time. You must establish momentum. You must start to get powerful people to change. Yes, you need all that. But if you want to guarantee success against authoritarianism, you do have to get big enough. And specifically, according to these political scientists, you need to grow to the size where you are speaking for at least 3.5% of the population, where at least 3.5% of the population is out in the streets protesting and taking part in the movement. Pretty much every successful movement has hit that threshold. They call it the 3.5% rule. If you keep all the other criteria and you get 3.5% of the country out on the streets with you, history suggests you will win. Are you doing the math already? I'll do it for you. In the United States, 3.5% of the population would be almost 12 million people, which is a lot of people. But consider the trend line just this year. For the big hands-off protests in April, Indivisible estimated turnout of 3 million people. For the big No King's Day protests in June, estimates were 5 million people. This weekend, the estimates are more than 7 million people. So we've gone from 3 to 5 to 7 in just a few months. Does 12 million seem so impossible when the movement is growing like this and growing everywhere? When it's growing right where you live, where your one voice and your neighbors count? Indivisible is not yet. Indivisible and this No Kings movement, 50-51, all these other people who are participating in this anti-authoritarian movement, they're not yet at 3.5%. They're not yet at 11.9 million, but they are aiming at it, and they're doing it by being everywhere. Erica Chenoweth is the researcher who coined this 3.5% rule and who has studied it all over the globe. Erica Chenoweth joins us next. Stay with us.
Is your asthma rescue a dinosaur? Air Supra is the only asthma rescue inhaler FDA approved to treat symptoms and help prevent asthma attacks. Air Supra should not be used as a maintenance treatment for asthma. Get medical help right away if your breathing doesn't improve or worsens, or for serious allergic reactions like rash, mouth or tongue swelling, trouble breathing.
On hundreds of anti-authoritarian movements worldwide, and a breakthrough book called Why Civil Resistance Works. Dr. Erica Chenoweth has coined what is known as the 3.5% rule. 3.5% rule says that movements that engage at least 3.5% of a country's population in active nonviolent protest against an authoritarian government, those movements succeed. Those movements have never failed to bring about the change that they seek. Dr. Chenoweth is a professor at Harvard's Kennedy School, a faculty dean at Harvard College, and a professor at the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study. Dr. Erica Chenoweth, I really appreciate you making time to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let me ask you if you feel like we Americans, looking at this No Kings turnout over the course of this weekend, should think of ourselves as doing something that's analogous to any other movement of the past several decades, any of the other movements around the world that you've studied and that you've analyzed that you think looks a little bit like what we're doing, or are we doing something unique?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think there are lots of different historical analogs. There are analogs from our own history, cases in the United States where we've had what political scientists refer to as sub-state authoritarianism. That means where it's happening in different states or in whole regions of the country. I think that we're now in a situation where, I and a lot of others in my field kind of think of what's happening in the U.S. right now as kind of an acute democratic backsliding episode. And there are certainly many other cases from around the world where people have mobilized nonviolent civil resistance to try to push back against that and defend, expand, and improve their democracy.
We're seeing opponents of the anti-authoritarian movement characterize it as if it is violent, when it very clearly isn't. I think it's pretty remarkable that we had 7 million plus people out protesting on Saturday. There was basically zero violence. One of the things I've been interested about in your research is thinking about that not just as like a moral good, but the tactical advantages of nonviolence. Obviously, a nonviolent movement is going to attract larger numbers of people and has more potential to attract larger numbers of people over time, just because more people are turned off by violence than turned on by it. But why else is nonviolence tactically smart?
Mm-hmm. Well, first, I would say remarkable is the word for the fact that millions and millions of Americans, engaged in a nationwide protest on Saturday, and there was basically no violence. That is something that is truly historic. There are not very many historical reference points for something that disciplined, and I just want to call that out. I mean, that is a truly remarkable fact. And then in terms of why it is that nonviolent resistance tends to be more likely to succeed, I mean, one of the things you mentioned is numbers, for sure, but it's not just that the numbers matter. It's what the numbers then allow the movement to do. And one of the things that they allow the movement to do is to begin to leverage those numbers into social, economic, cultural, and political power. So in democracies where people get to elect out their leaders, often we see very high correlations between protest turnout and the outcomes of elections. So that is true in the United States, even during midterm elections. In fact, the Tea Party protests of 2009 were shown to have a strong correlation with turnout for kind of Tea Party Republicans in the 2010 midterms. The 2018 blue wave, and not just turnout in support of Democratic candidates, but also the diversity of the candidates who ran, leading to the most diverse U.S. Congress we've ever had, was strongly correlated to participation in the Women's March. The 2020 protests associated with Black Lives Matter were similarly associated with electoral outcomes and many other reform outcomes in the 2020 election as well. So, even just in terms of how protest relates to political transformations through our institutions, there are many different studies that show those correlations. More broadly, protests, even in countries where elections aren't available to change the political environment, they can be incredibly powerful in making elite behavior change in general, right? So a lot of times people in this field refer to pillars of support, that every authoritarian relies entirely on the cooperation, obedience, and help of people in the civil service and the security forces, within their inner entourage, the business and economic community, cultural and faith leaders. And when people who are in those institutions begin to think, you know what, there are a lot more people in this protest movement than I expected, and I recognize my associates there, and I align my future more with them than with this person who I think is kind of bumbling and incompetent anyway, that's when you start to see those loyalty shifts and those pillars of support shift in their own behavior. And so I think that nonviolent resistance movements have those opportunities precisely because they are more likely to elicit the direct participation of people from all walks of life, and then that can translate into meaningful shifts in the sort of self-interested calculation of people in all kinds of different positions of influence.
I know this is highly calculated and highly metric-driven political science, but it's also totally rational and explicable, and I thank you for helping us understand it. Erica Chenoweth, professor at the Harvard Kennedy School, speaking on their own behalf here, not on behalf of Harvard, I should note. But Dr. Chenoweth, I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, more news ahead tonight. Stay with us.
So what are you thinking?
I'm thinking about our honeymoon. What about Africa, safari?
This was seen in a bunch of protests around the country. Women holding signs that described themselves as Antifa. Also, don't piss off the old ladies. No one crowned you king. This one moved me. 100 years old, first protest. This wannabe king deserves a royal flush. That was Venice, Florida. This one, I think we can put this on television. Do we have the free balls one? Free balls for members of Congress who lost theirs. Here's one from D.C. No wonder eggs are so expensive. All the chickens are in Congress. Here's one special out of Illinois. Mike Johnson blocked me on Grindr. I don't know what that means. I'll look it up. In Alaska, the only kings we want are crab. The only kings we want are salmon. In San Diego, California, don't poke the bear, although it's almost impossible when they're that cute. So bad, even the unicorns are here. That was San Francisco. This is a good one. Donald T. wrecks everything he touches. That was Minneapolis. Get it? Wrecks everything he touches. Duct taping the USA together till 2029. That's in D.C. And of all the inflatable ones, this one's my favorite. Sorry for being weird. This is my first dictatorship. That's in D.C. We'll be right back.
Incoming.
University hosted Andrew Young and did a whole event about Andrew Young, the dirty work, at Howard University. Brought the house down. It was fantastic. Helped make the debut on Friday night. Such a big success. Jonathan, I am totally in your debt. Thank you so much for doing that.
Oh, Rachel, thank you. And you stole my thunder because I was going to thank you for bringing that documentary out into the world. Andrew Young is one of those heroes of American history that people may have heard of, but don't understand just how fully he is a part of why we are where we are today, why people feel emboldened, as we saw them on Saturday, by the millions come out and exercise their First Amendment rights. So it is a beautifully done documentary. I'm thrilled. One, I was thrilled to watch it. Two, I was thrilled to sit once again with the great man and listen to people in the audience when they heard the stuff that he did, the oohs and the ahs and the wonderment of looking at living history right in front of them.
Yeah. Yeah, it was, I mean, it's such a humbling thing to have been able to do this documentary with him. And thank you for saying all those kind of things about the film. But your event with him at Howard, talking with him about it and basically letting people know that this was coming really just meant the world to me, Jonathan. So as I said, I am in your debt. I owe you, my friend. Thank you.
Oh, I'm going to put that shit over here. Expect a call.
I will do.
All right, Rachel, thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you.
7 million. That's how many Americans took to the streets on Saturday at nearly 3,000 events nationwide, marching under one banner, No Kings.
This is the most American thing that you can do. Protest and speak for what you believe in.
The people who come out here and fight and who want to resist, those are the people who make change. Those are the people who make history.
I wore the uniform since I was 18 years old. I never thought I would see this.
We live by the Constitution, and that we need to protect that more than anything.
They're not going to intimidate us with tyrant talk. We are out here to stand up for this democracy.
Do not cower to the fascism and the threats that are coming from D.C. That's what they want us to do, and they will only be successful in that if we remain silent.
I don't think we need a king. We definitely don't need a dictatorship, and it's time for him to go.
We have a constitution for a reason. It provides us inalienable rights that we have to adhere to. And in this country, we have no kings, period.
According to the NYPD, more than 100,000 New Yorkers marched across all 5 boroughs, quote, peacefully exercising their First Amendment rights, and the NYPD made 0 protest-related arrests. And while thousands packed Times Square in Donald Trump's hometown to protest against Trump's authoritarian playbook, Donald Trump posted an AI-generated video of himself as a fighter pilot flying a jet labeled King Trump while wearing a crown. The New York Times reports, quote, the fake video set to the song Danger Zone by Kenny Loggins shows the plane dropping a brown liquid resembling feces onto the heads of protesters who appeared to be gathered in a city. That was the President of the United States' response to Americans exercising their right to protest. In a statement, Kenny Loggins said, quote, I can't imagine why anybody would want their music used or associated with something created with the sole purpose of dividing us. Too many people are trying to tear us apart, and we need to find new ways to come together. We're all Americans, and we're all patriotic. There is no us and them. That's not who we are, nor is it what we should be. It's all of us. We're in this together, and it is my hope that we can embrace music as a way of celebrating and uniting each and every one of us. But tell that to Republicans, who have spent weeks calling the No Kings protests a, quote, hate America rally, and dismissing the concerns of everyday American citizens across the country. Tell that to House Speaker Mike Johnson, who continued to spread those lies days after the peaceful protests. This morning, Mike Johnson displayed photos of signs at Saturday's protests and defended Donald Trump's AI video.
The president uses social media to make a point. You can argue he's probably the most effective person who's ever used social media for that. He is using satire to make a point.
Mike Johnson never said what that point was. Meanwhile, here on Earth One, millions of Americans were living in reality and defending it, including in Chicago, where an estimated 250,000 Chicagoans peacefully demonstrated against Donald Trump's policies and his deportation campaign against their city. Our next guest, Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson, spoke at Saturday's rally.
We will not bend, we will not bow, we will not cower, we will not submit to the authoritarianism that is coming down. I want to make this point emphatically clear, that the attempt to divide and conquer this nation will not prevail, because when the people are united, justice always prevails.
Now, here's what Trump could be working on while he's posting dumb juvenile videos. Today, the government shutdown became the third longest shutdown in history. And with no end in sight, hundreds of thousands of federal employees are missing paychecks. Trump did nothing about that today. Under President Trump, auto loan delinquencies are surging. The Washington Post reports, quote, "The weakness in the auto market is one of the clearest indications that low and middle income families, the economy's foundation, could be starting to buckle. Because many Americans need their cars to get around, auto loan delinquencies can be a telling gauge of financial hardship." Trump did nothing about that. Under President Trump, Americans' paychecks are still not keeping up with inflation as the Trump tariffs make everyday goods more expensive. A new poll shows 68% of adults describe the economy these days as poor, while 32% say it's good. 59% say their family finances are holding steady, and 28% say they are falling behind. Only 12% say they're getting ahead. Those are real issues Americans are dealing with, and yet the President of the United States seems more interested in being a king, both in reality and in warped digital fantasies. That's why millions of Americans showed up on Saturday, peacefully marching, speaking out, and reminding the country that in this nation, the power belongs to the people. Leading off our discussion tonight, Ezra Levin, co-founder and co-executive director of the Indivisible Project. Ezra, great to see you again. It's been a long time. What do you want Americans to take away from seeing millions march across?
An estimated 7 million people took part in No Kings rallies Saturday to protest President Trump's embrace of authoritarianism. Organizers say protests were held in over 2,600 cities, towns, villages across all 50 states in what was one of the largest days of protests in U.S. history, surpassing the first No Kings Day of action in June. In Chicago, the protests stretched for 2 miles as about 250,000 people took to the streets. Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson addressed the crowd, calling for a general strike. An estimated 200,000 rallied in Washington, D.C. Senator Bernie Sanders addressed the crowd.
This moment is not just about one man's greed, one man's corruption, or one man's contempt for the Constitution. This is about a handful of the wealthiest people on earth who, in their insatiable greed, have hijacked our economy and our political system in order to enrich themselves at the expense of working families throughout this country.
At a No Kings rally in Atlanta, Georgia, speakers included former gubernatorial candidate, voting rights activist Stacey Abrams.
And yet we are living in a moment where ethno-fascists are in charge of the government, when Christian nationalists are making economic policy, when we have a secret police telling us who we are. Their destination is division. Their destination is destruction. and their destination is denied. We will not go back, and we will not let them turn us around.
President Trump responded to the No Kings protest by posting an AI-generated video that showed him wearing a crown, flying a jet labeled King Trump. In the video, Trump is seen dumping feces on the heads of protesters from the plane. Trump has also repeated his threat to investigate billionaire philanthropist George Soros, who Trump claimed had helped fund the No Kings protests, which attracted massive crowds despite attempts by House Speaker Mike Johnson and other Republicans to label the protest as a Hate America rally. Israel carried out a wave of deadly attacks in Gaza over the weekend and temporarily halted aid deliveries. But Israel's now saying it will resume enforcement of the U.S.-brokered ceasefire. Israel had accused Hamas of killing 2 Israeli soldiers in Rafah, but there are reports the soldiers died when their bulldozer ran over unexploded ordnance. Officials in Gaza say Israel's killed at least 97 Palestinians and injured 230 since the ceasefire went into effect October 10th. On Friday, Israeli forces fired a tank shell, killing 11 members of a Palestinian family in the Zaytun neighborhood of Gaza City. The dead included 3 women and 7 children between the ages of 5 and 13. Israel also bombed the headquarters of the Palestine media production company in central Gaza, killing broadcast engineer Ahmed Abu Matar. His colleague Ajib Mohammed described the attack.
We were sitting here safe and sound, and as you can see, the place is closed off to us. No one enters or leaves. We are all journalists. No strangers were entering or staying with us. Then the bombing happened right next to us, in the middle of the chalet. Our colleague, the broadcasting engineer, was martyred, and our colleague's child's son was also martyred.
On the diplomatic front, President Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff and Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner have returned to Israel ahead of Vice President J.D. Vance's trip to Israel. President Trump says the government will send National Guard troops to San Francisco and may invoke the Insurrection Act to do it. It comes as President Trump asked the Supreme Court Friday to allow him to send National Guard to the Chicago area by lifting lower court orders blocking the deployment. Meanwhile, 7 officials in Tennessee are suing the Trump administration for sending the National Guard to Memphis. The lawsuit, backed by the nonprofit Democracy Forward, says, quote, "Our nation's founders recognized military rule was incompatible with liberty and democracy. The facts on the ground cannot justify defendants' overreach," unquote. Meanwhile, Vermont's Republican Governor Phil Scott blasted Trump's deployment of National Guard troops to Chicago and Portland, calling it unconstitutional, following Oklahoma's Republican Governor Kevin Stitt criticizing the deployment of Texas National Guard to Illinois. Stitt is the head of the National Governors Association. The federal government shutdown has entered its 20th day. Senate Democrats proposed a bill last week to keep funding the government through October 31st, reversing cuts to Medicaid and extending Affordable Care Act subsidies. But that measure failed to garner a veto-proof majority of 60 votes. It comes as President Trump's tried to lay off thousands of furloughed workers, but that move was temporarily halted by the courts. President Trump is threatening to cut off foreign aid to Colombia and raise tariffs on Colombian goods after the Colombian president, Gustavo Petro, condemned the U.S. for blowing up boats in the Caribbean, many off the coast of Venezuela. In recent weeks, the U.S. has blown up at least 7 boats, alleging without proof they were used for drug trafficking. Petro accused the U.S. of killing innocent Colombians. Trump responded by calling Petro a, quote, illegal drug leader, unquote. Petro then responded by writing, quote, trying to promote peace in Colombia is not being a drug trafficker, unquote. Meanwhile, the U.S. has repatriated 2 people from Ecuador and Colombia who survived a deadly U.S. strike on a vessel last week. This all comes as President Trump is threatening to begin launching attacks inside Venezuela, despite reports Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has offered to give the U.S. a stake in Venezuela's oil wealth and other natural resources. Trump was asked about this on Friday at the White House and responded by using an expletive to warn Venezuela.
Offering mediation, what should we do to stop that?
He has offered everything. He's offered everything. You're right. You know why? Because he doesn't want to around with the United States.
Trump has admitted that the United States has launched a covert CIA operation in Venezuela. In Bolivia, Senator Rodrigo Paz won Sunday's presidential election, defeating another right-wing candidate, former President Jorge Tuto Quiroga. Paz's election marks the end of 20 years of rule in Bolivia by MAS, the Movement Towards Socialism Party, which first came to power in 2006 with the election of Evo Morales. Rodrigo Paz is the son of the former Bolivian president, Jaime Paz Zamora. Ukrainian drones struck a major gas processing plant in southern Russia Sunday, sparking a fire. It follows an explosive White House meeting Friday between Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and President Trump that reportedly descended into a shouting match where Trump pressured Zelensky to accept Russia's terms for ending the war. Trump also refused Ukraine's request for long-range Tomahawk missiles. Trump reportedly told Zelensky, quote, "If Putin wants it, he will destroy you," unquote. Speaking to reporters, Trump referred to Ukraine's Donbas region as cut up, urging Ukraine to, quote, "leave it the way it is right now," unquote, which would essentially mean ceding territory to Russia. It comes as Trump and Putin are set to meet in Budapest in the coming weeks. Prince Andrew has announced he's giving up his royal titles ahead of the publication of an explosive book by Jeffrey Epstein survivor Virginia Giuffre. In her book, Nobody's Girl, a memoir of surviving abuse and fighting for justice, Giuffre details how she was forced to have sex with Prince Andrew beginning.
I'm joined now by Arizona Attorney General Chris Mays. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me.
So we've seen that Mike Johnson has refused for over 3 weeks now to seat Representative-elect Adelita Grijalva. You've now taken action against Mike Johnson. Can you explain what's being done in court?
Yeah, so we are right now, as we film this and tape this, we are working on a lawsuit, essentially demand that Mike Johnson seat Adelita Grijalva. I am coming to you not far from her district, actually. And as you know, Mike Johnson has refused to seat the duly elected representative from the 7th District of Arizona. Not sure what his motives are for that. Could be as many as AGs.
A Buckingham Palace source has told the BBC that they accept there may be more days of pain ahead as a result of the scandal surrounding Prince Andrew. The King's engagements this week include a visit to the Vatican. It all comes as the Met Police says it is actively looking into claims that Prince Andrew asked one of his personal protection officers to find out information about his accuser, Virginia Giuffre. Ms. Giuffre's posthumous memoir, which the BBC has obtained a copy of, is officially released tomorrow, putting Prince Andrew under more scrutiny. He has consistently denied any wrongdoing. Our correspondent Ellie Price reports.
It's still dominating the front pages, at home and around the world.
After a string of scandals, Prince Andrew is dropping his Duke of York title.
We begin with that breaking news from London, where Prince Andrew will no longer use his royal titles, including Duke of York.
The headlines are taking a lot of oxygen out of the royal room, one source told the BBC. Perhaps a classic example of British understatement, given the ongoing revelations about the King's brother. Despite him relinquishing his honours and titles on Friday, the heat has not gone out of this scandal.
I'll be honest, my first therapy session did not go well, but it taught me something important. You don't get the best result.
Virginia Giuffre's full posthumous memoir, obtained by the BBC in a London bookshop this weekend, describes how she felt she might die a sex slave at the hands of Jeffrey Epstein and his circle. She says she had sex with Prince Andrew on 3 separate occasions, including once with Epstein and approximately 8 other young women. While there are no new claims in the book, it makes for a harrowing read, which paints a picture of a web of rich and powerful people abusing young women. Prince Andrew has consistently denied any wrongdoing and says he doesn't recall meeting Virginia Giuffre. But yesterday, the Metropolitan Police confirmed it was actively looking into reports that Prince Andrew tried to obtain personal information about her through his personal protection team. Her family have called for Andrew to be stripped of his prince status, something echoed by the leader of the Scottish National Party at Westminster, Stephen Flynn, adding to pressure on the government to change the rules to allow it to happen.
At the moment, a title can be given, but it can't be removed. And I expect that is the reason why the Duke of York, or the former Duke of York, says that he will no longer be using that title. However, it doesn't say that he doesn't possess that title. And the removal of titles bill would bring real clarity to that matter, giving more powers to the king. And I think that that would be.
The negative headlines around Prince Andrew continue. This time, they're coming from the posthumous memoir by Virginia Giuffre, which is hitting bookshops right now. We'll discuss what is in the book on this episode of the BBC's Daily News podcast, Newscast. And just a warning that we will be discussing some distressing content, and that Prince Andrew denies all the allegations against him. Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio, and over the last few episodes of Newscast, we've seen the mounting negative headlines about Prince Andrew. On Friday night, it was that statement from him saying he was going to relinquish nearly all his royal titles, although crucially not the prince bit of his royal title. Then over the weekend, there were those reports that in 2011, when that old photo from 2001 surfaced of him with Virginia Giuffre, he spoke to his police protection officer to get him to look into her background and what was going on. And now today, on Monday, the 20th of October, earlier than planned, Virginia Giuffre's posthumous autobiography has hit the bookshelves. So, looks like...
Before we begin this morning, a few words of caution. The following story touches on mature subjects, and viewer discretion is advised. It's the story of Jeffrey Epstein accuser Virginia Giuffre, whose posthumous memoir comes out this week. Here's Tracy Smith.
I was recruited at a very young age from Mar-a-Lago and entrapped in a world that I didn't understand, and I've been fighting that very world to this day.
If the tragedy of Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking ring had a face, it might have been this woman, Virginia Roberts Giuffre. Before she died from suicide last April at the age of 41, she wrote an unflinching memoir, Nobody's Girl, with the hope it would be published in case of her death.
Do you think about that when you're walking around New York, that so much of it actually happened here?
I absolutely do. It's changed the city for me.
Co-author and journalist Amy Wallace spent more than 4 years writing with Giuffre, who's been celebrated for her honesty and questioned by some about the accuracy of her memories.
So as far as you could tell, her memory was pretty crystal clear.
What she always said to me was, I may not remember days, times, dates, but when you have a man raping you, his face 6 inches from your own, you remember that face.
Virginia Giuffre said Epstein's former girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, recruited her to the sex ring in 2000 when she was a 16-year-old working at Mar-a-Lago, President Trump's resort in Palm Beach, Florida, and she was quickly immersed in Epstein's world of money and depravity. In this photo, taken at a party in 2001, Giuffre is the girl in the foreground. Maxwell's now serving a 20-year sentence for child sex trafficking and has reportedly sought a presidential pardon, something President Trump has not publicly decided for or against.
She should not be pardoned.
And explain why you sat there with Virginia for 4 years.
She did not just procure. She did not just keep the date book of what girls came when. No. This woman participated in the sexual abuse, and she should absolutely not be pardoned.
He knows what happened. I know what happened. And there's only one of us telling the truth.
Giuffre also famously sued Britain's Prince Andrew in 2021, to whom she said she was trafficked for sex 3 times, starting when she was 16. The prince repeatedly denied any wrongdoing, but settled with Giuffre the following year and issued a statement saying he regretted his association with Epstein. But the rumors kept flying, and Andrew became a distraction to the crown. So just this past Friday, he announced he was giving up all of his royal titles, including Duke of York. And he, Virginia Giuffre wrote, was only one of many.
Did Virginia believe that the Epstein files contain the names of other men who abused her and maybe others that have not been revealed yet?
She didn't just believe it, she knew it. She knew what she'd told them. And some of those names are not public.
So authorities have those names in the Epstein files?
Presumably, if somebody kept them in a file cabinet in an efficient way.
Giuffre also believed there might be a trove of videotapes from cameras in Epstein's homes.
Release the files!
And in recent months, there's been mounting pressure from people who want the president to authorize the release of all of the Epstein files. Virginia Giuffre was one of them.
Did she mention President Trump at all in your discussions?
Oh, she absolutely did. She was a huge Trump fan because he campaigned on releasing the Epstein files.
But she never talked about him in any sense that he was involved in any of this?
No. No, he was not, as far as she knew, and again, she was there for 2+ years. But as far as she knew, he was not involved in the ring of trafficking that Epstein was working.
Giuffre also writes that her sexual abuse ordeal started at home. She says her father, Sky Roberts Sr., started abusing her when she was 7 years old. He didn't respond to our request for comment, but told Amy Wallace he never abused his daughter. Virginia's brother, Sky Roberts, and his wife, Amanda, say they believe her.
And you confronted him.
He knows what he did.
He denied it in the book. You know, Amy reached out to him and he said, absolutely not, I would never touch my daughter. You don't believe that?
I believe my sister.
And as for Jeffrey Epstein, who was found dead in his New York prison cell in 2019 while awaiting trial on sex trafficking charges, Virginia Giuffre said his abuse went beyond sexual assault, like ordering her to tuck him in at night.
So she would go in, she would pull the covers up. He didn't want sex, and she was instructed to stay with him until he fell asleep.
It just struck me because this is a young woman who wasn't nurtured all that much as she grew up, and here she's turning around and having to perform this nurturing act to her abuser.
Yes. And it's one of the reasons that Epstein and Maxwell said to her repeatedly, "You'd make a great mother."
Giuffre went on to say that they asked her to carry a child for them and sign away her parental rights.
It's like a modern Handmaid's Tale. And interestingly, that was the straw that broke the camel's back for her.
Years after Virginia Giuffre left Epstein, she was tormented by what she said she suffered at his hands. She married, moved to her husband's native Australia, became a mom and a voice for abuse survivors, but there was turmoil at home. Shortly before she died, she told People magazine that her husband, Robert Giuffre, physically abused her, but the courts granted him a restraining order and custody of their 3 children. In a statement to Sunday Morning, Robert Giuffre's attorney said that since the case is still pending, Robert and the children were, quote, very limited in their ability to respond to the various unfounded allegations. Virginia's brother and sister-in-law say the loss of her children might have helped push Virginia over the edge.
And you know there are so many conspiracy theories out there, so I just want to make clear, are you absolutely sure that your sister took her own life?
I am. But I was with her in her final days. I mean, I was the one that found my sister when she had passed.
I'm so sorry. She wrote in her book, "My goal now is to prevent the emotional time bomb that lives inside me from ever detonating again." What do you think happened?
The worst thing that could happen to a mother. Her children. She was separated from her children. And that is something that she couldn't bear. That was something she couldn't, I don't think any mother could handle.
Virginia Giuffre left behind an account of her life that's both illuminating and heartbreaking. A window into the mind of a young girl preyed upon by demons and a woman who fought them till the end.
Who was Virginia to you?
Hey guys, this is Senator John Ossoff in Georgia, and please hear me out because I'm the only Democratic senator.
Caroline Leavitt has reached a new low of disgustingness, and in a normal country, everyone would denounce this. During an interview on Fox News, Donald Trump's
She battled the world's most powerful
I was just a toy to be used.
and dangerous.
I got out of it. It was an escape, but it was an escape with a happy ending.
But Virginia Giuffre kept another secret.
She was telling us, like, this is what I'm really going through.
Now, her family revealed
It's just like this switch.
her private pain
I have never seen my sister that weak.
and final wishes.
We want to make sure the world knows